right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to unpack a pretty bold take on one of the most famous alliances in history, the so-called special relationship between the US and the UK. We're looking at a perspective that really challenges the story we've all been told.
You know the popular version, right? The US and the UK, they're steadfast allies, partners through thick and thin, friends bound by language and shared values. It's a really powerful narrative, and honestly, it's shaped global politics for the better part of a century.
But what if that's not the whole picture? The source material we're digging in today asks the tough question: what if this relationship isn't really one of equals, but a carefully managed story of dependence?
Okay, so that brings us to our first section. We're going to put two very different stories side by side: the common, comfortable idea of the special relationship versus the source's much more critical and, frankly, unsettling argument. So first, let's talk about the story we all know, the special relationship. It's this idea of a unique, almost symbiotic partnership. You hear the term, and you probably think of Churchill and Roosevelt, or Reagan and Thatcher, standing shoulder to shoulder against the world. It's a bond supposedly forged in the fires of World War II.
Now, here's where our source flips that whole idea on its head. It reframes the entire thing as imperial succession. The argument here is that this wasn't a partnership of equals at all. Instead, it was a calculated, systematic process where American power and interests gradually, and very purposefully, pushed out British global influence.
And while this quote from the analysis really just lays it all out there, it's arguing that the term special relationship is basically a polite fiction. It's a consolation prize that lets Britain feel like it's still a major player on the world stage, while hiding the fact that the real power has shifted. So, where did this all supposedly begin? Well, according to this analysis, the seeds of this dependency were planted during the one event that's supposed to have cemented the friendship in the first place: the Second World War.
Let's take a look at the Lend-Lease program. As you can see, there are two totally different versions of this story. The popular one, the one with Roosevelt's famous garden hose metaphor, paints it as pure generosity between neighbors. But the source we're looking at argues that the terms were incredibly harsh. Britain was forced to sell off its overseas assets and even open up its private financial records. The conclusion here is that Lend-Lease was designed to make sure Britain won the war, sure, but also to make sure it came out the other side economically broken and reliant on the US.
And then there's this other piece of the puzzle: Operation Paperclip. Think about this. While London was still clearing the rubble from V2 rocket attacks, the US was secretly recruiting the very scientists who designed those weapons, guys like Wernher von Braun. This analysis frames this as a deeply cynical move, prioritizing the looming Cold War with the Soviets over justice or even solidarity with its closest ally. Okay, so let's move into what happened right after the war. For Britain, the celebration of victory in 1945 very quickly turned into a massive economic crisis. And this was a moment, the source claims, that the US was perfectly positioned to exploit.
Just look at how fast this all happened. Victory in Europe is declared in May. Just 3 months later, President Truman cuts off Lend-Lease aid. Abruptly, no warning. Britain, its entire economy shattered by 6 years of war, is suddenly pushed to the edge of bankruptcy. They had no choice but to send their top economist, John Maynard Keynes, to Washington, basically cap in hand.
This is the number at the heart of it all: the Anglo-American loan of $3.75 billion. On the surface, it sounds like a lifeline, right? But what's really fascinating here are the strings that were attached to that money.
The source argues these conditions were absolutely devastating. First off, it wasn't a gift, it was a loan, with interest. And get this, the final payment wasn't made until 2006. But the real killer, the condition that changed everything, was the third one. Britain was forced to dismantle its imperial preference system. This was the system that gave it special trade deals with its Commonwealth. Ending it basically blew the doors of the British Empire's markets wide open for American companies to rush in.
So once you have that kind of economic leverage over a country, what comes next? Well, this analysis argues that economic control quickly turned into strategic control. Britain was no longer seen as an equal partner, but was kind of repositioned as a senior but still subordinate deputy in this new American-led world order.
And if you need one single event that proves this point, the source says look no further than the Suez Crisis of 1956. When Britain went rogue and invaded Egypt without America's okay, the US didn't send troops, it used its financial power as a weapon. The Eisenhower administration threatened to dump all of its UK government bonds, which would have totally crashed the British economy. Britain was forced into a humiliating retreat. The message couldn't have been clearer: you move only when we say you can move. And according to the source, this junior partner role really defines the relationship even today. You see it in intelligence sharing, where the UK is a vital part of the Five Eyes network, but it's under US leadership. You see it in the military, the UK's independent nuclear deterrent. It runs on American-made Trident missiles. And in foreign policy, Britain often plays the role of the key international supporter for American-led initiatives.
So let's fast forward to today. The analysis we're examining sees Brexit not as Britain reclaiming its sovereignty, but as the final, logical chapter in this long story of growing dependence on the United States.
From this critical point of view, Brexit actually served several key American strategic interests. First, it weakened a potential economic rival in the European Union. Second, when the British pound fell in value, it made UK companies and assets cheaper for American investors. And maybe most importantly, by separating Britain from Europe, it locked the UK even more tightly into an American sphere of influence.
So here's the bottom line, the real takeaway from this perspective. As part of the EU, Britain could use the collective weight of Europe to balance against American pressure. By leaving, the source argues, Britain voluntarily gave up its only real counterweight, making it more dependent on Washington's goodwill than ever before.
And so we end right back where we began, with this central question. The analysis we've walked through today makes a powerful, and for some, a pretty uncomfortable case. Is this special relationship really this grand partnership of equals, born from shared values? Or is it a carefully constructed story that hides a deeper reality of managed dependence? The answer, as this source suggests, might be far more complicated than the story we've always been told.